Hey YouTube, Kiritwick here, bringing you all my Odion Ishtar Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck profile for post-Photon Hypernova. Odion Ishtar, Mystical Beast of Serket, the Trap Hell deck, Pharaoh's Servant or Servant of the Pharaoh deck, whatever you want to call this deck. It's a really awesome continuous trap deck that, emphasizes the main cards that Odion used in the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Series. We actually got some new cards to support the deck in the form of the new boss monster, Pharaonic Advent, and a couple other cards, including another main deck monster, and a new version of Embodiment of Apophis that runs much more consistently than just the 1600 attack point monster we had from the original cards that Odion used. I'm very happy with the updates to the deck. I took some critiques from people during the last Odion deck, which wasn't too long ago, but we did get new support in Photon Hypernova, so an update was definitely due. So let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile. So we'll go ahead and start off with the main deck monsters. For our boss monster, we're running 3 copies of Pharaonic Advent. It gains 300 attack for each continuous trap on the field and in the graveyards. You can only use each of the following effects of Pharaonic Advent once per turn. You can tribute 1 monster to special summon this card from your hand, and you can tribute 1 fairy, fiend, or reptile monster to add 1 continuous trap from your deck to your hand. Also, you cannot special summon for the rest of the turn, so special summon isn't really a big part of what the deck is meant to do. It's meant to be that trap setup, and then utilizing cards like our Temple of the King or our other go-to monster, Mystical Beast of Serket, for the added setup that those cards can provide with the other trap monsters that were run. So even if we're restricted with some of our special summons, we still have plenty of other search power depending on the continuous trap that you want to add from your deck to your hand to use by tributing a fairy, fiend, or reptile monster, which the new Apophis of the Swamp Deity is a reptile monster that we can easily tribute to do this play. I also run 3 copies of the new Cardon, the Clear-Sighted. When it's normal summon, you can set 1 continuous trap from your hand or graveyard. It can be activated this turn, and if this card is sent to the graveyard, you can activate this effect. Face-up traps you control cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects until the end of the next turn. So it also makes you want to run a few generic continuous traps just to utilize this playstyle, being able to set a continuous trap that may have been destroyed that's in your graveyard thanks to this card, and then also being able to reactivate it the same turn just gives you more of a quicker setup thanks to this card, giving you another monster to also potentially special summon out on the field as well. And it also counts as a fairy monster that you could also potentially tribute for the continuous trap search thanks to your Pharaonic Advent. I also run 3 copies of Mystical Beast of Serket. I was debating reducing the number of this card down. If I were to do so, I would probably take out this card and add a few other copies of some continuous traps in the deck. But with this card, you just need more of a search power. So you have consistency because there's no really other way to easily search out this card or Temple of the King. So I wanted to max out the numbers just because of that reason. Destroy this card if you do not control Temple of the Kings. Each time this card destroys a monster by battle, the destroyed monsters are removed from play, and it gains 500 attack. Remove from play or banish whichever card text you have for Mystical Beast of Serket. The card will be banished, and then this card gains an additional 500 attack. And it's not a one-time thing. Every time it destroys a monster, it keeps gaining those attack points for you to use. So this card also helps with the added power to send Mystical Beast of Serket with our Temple of the Kings to special summon 1 monster from your hand or deck, or 1 fusion monster from your extra deck, which we have set up a couple other fusion monsters to be able to summon out onto the field thanks to the Temple of the Kings, giving us some bigger boss monsters from the extra deck as well. I also run 3 copies of Makira the Destructor with this card. If it's sent from the monster zone to the graveyard, you can activate 1 trap card from your hand this turn. You can only activate this effect of Makira the Destructor once per turn, so just as another setup card to then utilize some of the other trap cards that are in your hand. If your opponent tries to destroy your Makira the Destructor, you can then just activate a trap card from your hand depending on the trap card you may want to use against your opponent. It can set up a bigger defense and one that your opponent may not have known was on the field at the time, and destroyed with another card that you can then utilize thanks to your Makira the Destructor. The last of the main deck monsters that I run is just the 1 copy of Uriah, Lord of Searing Flames. We run an incredibly big amount of continuous traps in this deck. It cannot be normal summon or set. It must be special summon from your hand by sending 3 face-up traps you control to the graveyard. It gains 1,000 attack for each continuous trap in your graveyard, and once per turn you can target 1 set spell or trap your opponent controls, destroy destroy that target, and either player can activate spell or traps in response to this effect's activation. So all in total, we are running over 10 continuous traps in this deck, close to 20, and with that, you can have Uriah, if it's a very late game, reach those potential numbers with how many you may have set up in your graveyard with this card, or even just depending on the late game when you open it up. You can also mix around some of the numbers of Uriah if you want to increase them by taking out some other copies of cards like Yugioh the Destructor or Serket, depending on if you want to mix around those numbers for another potentially easier way to get Uriah out, since this deck's main focus is continuous traps. Moving on now to the spells, we run a really low spell count, just 3 copies of Temple of the Kings. You can activate 1 trap card the turn it was set. You can send 1 Mystical Beast of Serket in your monster zone to the graveyard, and also this card to special summon 1 monster from your hand or deck, or 1 fusion monster from your extra deck. You can only use this effect of Temple of the Kings once per turn, but you have multiple fusion targets. That's why I'm also running 3 copies of Temple of the Kings and 3 copies of Serket, because then you do have the chance to potentially use this card multiple times, but you have plenty of awesome extra deck monsters to be able to summon out on the field. Just remember, you have to have those fusion monsters that don't have any restrictions, like saying this card must be fusion summoned. That's why one of them, and we'll get to the rest with the extra deck, is Naturia Exterio. This card says a fusion summon of this card can only be done with the above fusion materials, but you can still summon it out through other means, like your Temple of the Kings. With the other spell that we run in the deck, just being 1 copy of Card of Demise, you really don't have much of a hand setup in this deck. Your main play is the trap card setup that you'll set onto the field, so you can use Card of Demise to at least get more of a, draw into this hand for that play, and then also for the setup, depending on what you may want to use for that draw power. If you didn't want to run Card of Demise, you can always try Called by the Grave as just a one-of spell option, but I like this card for that draw 3 once you have no other cards in your hand to use. That is it for the spells. Moving on now to the traps, running 3 copies of the new Apophis, the Swamp Deity. During the main phase, special summon this card as a normal monster, Reptile Earth, level 6, 2000 attack, and 2200 defense. This card is also still a trap. Then you can negate the effects of face-up cards your opponent controls up to the number of other continuous traps you control until the end of this turn. I would say this is the strongest continuous trap we have in the deck in terms of continuous traps that can be special summoned out onto the field. Being able to just negate face-up cards means we can stop, spells, traps, monsters, whatever may be face up on the field of our opponents, using this card as a sort of late arrival monster onto the field while we have other continuous ones as well. It can be a card you can activate thanks to cards like Yugioh the Destructor, or it can be a card you draw into if you have Temple of the Kings, then activating that card this turn as well, as long as you have other continuous trap monsters on the field, or just, the continuous cards on the field for traps. You just get those negates of your opponent's face-up cards until the end of this turn, making it much easier to get around some of those other cards they may have. I also run 3 copies of Angel Statue Azaroon. You special summon this card as an effect monster. Fairy Light, level 4, attack, 1800, and defense, 1800. It's still also a trap, and once per turn when your opponent would special summon a monster while this card's in your monster zone, you can send to the graveyard 1 continuous trap in your monster zone that was special summoned from the spell and trap card zone. Negate the summon if you do destroy that monster or monsters, and when this card in the monster zone is destroyed by battle, you can destroy the monster that destroyed it. I would say the next best power play, since it just has destruction power against your opponent and another definite 3 of being a fairy monster as well, means you also have the option to tribute it, just like you could with Apophis, the Swamp Deity, with your Pharaonic Advent as another searcher for another continuous trap from your deck to your hand. I also run 3 copies of Mimesis Elephant, a more defensive monster having 2000 defense, but also being able to just declare a type and attribute, and then targeting a face-up monster on the field, and making it that type and attribute means that you can also disrupt your opponent's plays by changing that monster of the field, and then also being able to utilize it as a way to change those cards for you, then to be able to use that Pharaonic Advent tribute effect even better, turning it into either a fairy fiend or reptile monster to tribute with this card. I also run 3 copies of Tiki Curse. After activation, special summon this card. It's treated as an effect monster. Rock, Dark, level 4, 1800 attack, and 1000 defense. And while this card is treated as an effect monster, if another trap card on the field battles an opponent's monster, destroy the opponent's monster after damage calculation. Just an easier way to get over some of the more peskier monsters your opponent may have if you use your other cards, like Apophis, the Swamp Deity, as a effect negation on the field. You can then use Tiki Curse and get around those monster effects that may have been preventing you from using cards like this with so easily. I also run 3 copies of our Zoma the Spirit, another bigger boss monster to summon out. This one helps with some burn damage when this card, if it's summoned this way, destroyed by battle, you inflict damage to your opponent equal to the attack of the monster that destroyed it. So as a more defensive measure, your opponent may not want to try and destroy our Zoma the Spirit. You special summon it in defense, so it'll have 500 defense, making it a little, easier for your opponent to want to destroy over it. But depending on the monster they swing into it with, they could be taking some pretty big amounts of damage as well. I also run 2 copies of Metal Reflect Slime, another bigger defense continuous trap option, just like our Elephant, but with this card being 3,000 defense, the only problem is this card cannot attack, and that's really all it has going for it. That's why I only run 2 copies of it. And also 2 copies of Statue of Anguish Pattern. With this card, if it's special summoned from the spell and trap card zone to a monster zone, while this card is in the monster zone, you can target a card on the field and destroy it. So with this card, if a card is special summoned and you have this card on the field, you not only have the destruction play, you also have the additional effect of whatever other card you may summon, whether it be your Statue Angel as a rune or your Apophis, the Swamp Deity, when summoned out on the field. For some of the lower numbers for the continuous traps, I also run 1 copy of the original embodiment of Apophis and 1 copy of Tiki Soul. The original one really doesn't do much justice to the new one. I just couldn't feel like leaving it out. If you didn't want to run either copy of these 2 cards, you have some other options. The Tiki Soul is more of just like a recycle card, and embodiment of Apophis, like I said, just the original one that Odion ran, but the new evolved form is definitely much better. I would put in Stingray. It was a continuous trap from Cross Souls, which definitely does have a big setup in the deck to use, and you can just replace both these cards for 2 copies of Stingray. And for the last of the traps, 2 copies of Skill Drain. Now this is just a searchable continuous trap. That's why I like running this in the deck. It's more the generic lineup that I said before as well. Just being able to have a search for Skill Drain with Pharaonic Advent makes all the difference, since you can just tribute 1 Fairy Fiend or Reptile Monster and add 1 continuous trap from your deck to your hand. So being able just to search out Skill Drain and then have it set up ready to go can stop a good majority of cards that your opponent may have, and whether they want to avoid the Apophis, the Swamp Deity, or Skill Drain, they're going to have a good number of card effects negated on their side of the field, depending on whichever card they try to use or stop. And then moving on now to the extra deck, we run a pretty generic lineup when we get to the Link monsters and the Xyz monsters, but for the Fusion monsters, I run 1 copy of Naturia Exterio, just a spell and trap negation that you can utilize against your opponent and easily summon out with Temple of the Kings. If you have Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, you can replace it for Black Skull Dragon. I just have this in here as a bigger vanilla boss monster to summon out. 1 Ojama King, it can stop your opponent's monster zones, and once again can be summoned out thanks to Temple of the King. 1 Predaplant Dragostapelia for another monster effect negation option, and 1 Parapsychroid for the direct attack option against your opponent for 1,600 points of damage. You have all 5 of these options available to you in the deck, depending on what you may want to go up against with your opponent and these cards. It all comes down to the situation that you may play against with your opponent also. But if you have Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, you can replace it for the Black Skull Dragon, being a 4,500 attack point monster instead of just a 3,200 attack point monster. And then for the Link monsters, 1 copy of Dark the Dark Charmer, 1 IP Masquerena, 1 Nightmare Cerberus, 1 Wee Witch's Apprentice, 1 Mrs. Radiance, and 1 copy of Nightmare Unicorn for all the generic Link monsters. And for the Xyz monsters, 1 Time Thief Redoer for the trap option when using a level 4 trap monster for its overlay, 1 Steel Swarm Roach, I like this card for the matchup against Kashtira, 1 number 38 because the Pharaonic Advents are an easy level 8 special summon onto the field, and then you can just overlay them as a more useful resource after you get your search for them, and 1 Divine Arsenal Zeus for the rank up of any of our Xyz monsters afterwards as well. And as for some of the go-to plays in the deck, this is a continuous trap setup deck, so a lot of it just goes into playing with what your opponent may do, but some of your own setups that you can utilize is with Temple of the Kings. So with this card being able to activate 1 trap card the turn it was set, so if you have your Temple of the Kings, the 1 trap card that can be potentially special summoned onto the field, and also your Mystical Beast of Serket. If you open up these 3 cards, you have your play. You can go for the Temple of the Kings Wings activation, being able to activate one trap card the turn it was set. Then you will set your trap card monster, activate it, and then special summon it onto the field. And you haven't taken up your normal summon yet, so you contribute that monster to be able to summon out your Mystical Beast of Serket. And then you have both of the requirements on this card and the other one. So with this card, you can send one Mystical Beast of Serket in your monster zone, and this card you control. This is not a field spell. I don't know why I put it in the field spell zone, but then with this card, being able to send both of them to special summon one monster from your hand or deck, or fusion monster from your extra deck, can give you access with just those 3 cards on the first turn, thanks to your Naturia Exterio on the field, and that can stop your opponent's spell and traps. You have 3 cards in the graveyard to banish, and then the additional ones to send off the top of the graveyard from the deck to the graveyard with that card also. Another play you can go for, if you have your Pharaonic Advent, with this card, you have to tribute the monster to special summon this card from your hand. So with this card, you can go for the play of your Cardon, the Clear-Sighted. When it's normal summon to set a continuous trap from your hand or graveyard, and it can be activated this turn. You can normal summon out your Cardon, then set the continuous trap from your hand to the field, activating it the turn it was set. So you'll special summon out your other monster, and then you have both the requirements, depending on the continuous trap, to then tribute out one monster to summon out your Pharaonic Advent, and then using Pharaonic Advent's tribute effect to then get another continuous trap from your deck to your hand. You're restricted for the special summon, but that could be the search for, like I said, the skill drain play, which can definitely shut down a good number of different cards your opponent may try to activate when their turn comes around. But that is it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Like I said, this was an awesome deck profile that I had a lot of fun making, and I hope you all enjoy building it as well. And as always, until next time, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and Kira Twig out.